So here, I want to talk about our next stop here, which is process. And process is about relational becoming and intelligent unfolding. So process largely has its roots in something called process thought. And this is described sometimes as the bridge building philosophy. The reason it's described as this is because it integrates the different areas such as philosophy, science, religion, and so on and so forth into a kind of coherent philosophy. And it's certainly nothing new, but quite often Alfred North Whitehead is given a lot of credit for being one of the main philosophers that talks about process, but it goes back to indigenous. It is entirely aligned to indigenous thinking, and also ancient traditions and spiritualities like Taoism, for example. Lao Tzu's Taoism is absolutely process oriented. It's about the flow of life and this kind of intelligent, creative, evolutionary force that sort of is what all novelty and creation emerges from in our lives, and all nature is an example of, including ourselves as humans. And the Greek philosopher Heraclitus is often quoted as saying, "All things flow," or "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." And that again speaks to this notion of process, which is this idea that there are no static or fixed entities in life, in this world, in this reality. Everything, absolutely everything, is in an unfolding process of becoming. Now, this is interesting for us as body image coaches because it completely shapes how we work with our clients. And so let's get into that. There's this idea that being is becoming, that the present moment, a lot of the time when we talk about this idea of the power of now, that there is only now. Well, there's this notion that there is now, of course, but also now holds everything that's come before. So process thought is very much respecting the past and looking toward the future, and in process as well, there's this idea that the future is yet to be written. The future is unknown. And so we're always in this process of becoming, this unfolding that carries everything that came before, but is unfolding in intelligent ways. I'll come on to that in a moment. There's this idea that all things are connected in process thought as well. So the idea that everything is absolutely interconnected. So what happens over here affects what happens there. In body-oriented coaching, how that shows up is the fact that what's happening in my body mind as coach may actually tell us something about what's happening in my client's experience over there. We're not nearly as separate as we might appear to be. And then the body felt sense implies novel possibilities. So this idea that the bodily felt sense, our felt sense of things, this embodied way of knowing, like when you have a clenching in your gut that says, no, that's not quite right for me, or something like this, or like tingles on the back of your neck that say, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. That it's always also, if we give it attention, it also implies novel possibilities. It implies our next step. And in this way, there's this carrying forward, as Eugene Jennings said, that the felt sense actually carries forward, takes us into what we're becoming next. And now this is an extraordinary idea, because what we're working with here, actually I'll come into that in a moment, is this idea that there is this ultimate driving force of creativity and novelty in the universe, that there's this source of possibilities and the harmony of all experiences. It's this continuous process of becoming an evolution in the world. Now, we as coaches can work with that, like I said, like a steward or a midwife to this unfolding process. And it's well documented across science and spirituality, spiritual traditions and indigenous teachings. So self-organization, such as in chaos theory, which talks a lot, and complexity sciences that talk about this notion of chaos, self-organization. There's this topic of syntropy, or the self-actualizing tendency as well in psychology, syntropy in sciences. In process philosophy, they talk about the lure of feeling, the eternal urge of desire. It's also described in some traditions as eros. And also there's another name for it, which is the holotropic attractor. But it all speaks to this idea that there's there's this evolutionary force that is moving us into our kind of further novelty, creativity, beauty, and we can work to support that. And that's what body-oriented coaching is all about. How do we support that which is already wanting to emerge? One of the ways that we work with what wants to emerge is through this idea that's beautifully described in the tradition of Taoism, which is called Wu Wei. And Wu Wei has other names like non-doing or effortless action or non-interference. We might think about this as the art of allowing. And it's this idea that when we can learn to trust what this evolutionary force, if we want to describe it as that is, or what Carl Rogers would describe as the formative tendency, we can really begin to sort of almost get out of the way of that. But when we understand how to support its unfolding in a kind of non-interfering way, we can really, as body-oriented coaches, really be of best service to our clients. It's how we have kind of maximum impact with minimal intervention. And that's one of the things we're working with as body-oriented coaches. Next up, we've got coaching. So of course, now we're edging closer and closer towards completing the picture of body-oriented coaching. We've looked at somatics, we looked at body mind therapy, and we looked at this kind of philosophy, you could say, or this school of thought process. And now we're on to coaching, co-creative partnering, empowering support. So one of the things that makes coaching distinct, I know, hasn't it flown by? Sorry, I saw that message in the chat there. One of the things that makes coaching distinct from some therapies is this idea, and from many of the therapies, in fact, but not all, is this idea that our clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. Now, that's a kind of phrase, a phraseology that's used a lot in the coaching industry. I think it's used regularly by the ICF, the International Coach Federation, amongst other coaches out there. I have no idea who originally wrote this or said this, but it's all over the place when we're talking about coaching. And I think it describes the approach of coaching beautifully, because coaching is not about telling people what to do. It's not about teaching people exactly the way to do things. It can be part of your coaching work, but that would need to be contracted for, because coaching, as it's defined by the ICF, is this non-directive, kind of more person-centered, really a client-led approach, one in which it's a process of inquiry in which we ask questions and let our curiosity support our clients to identify solutions to their own problems or ways forward themselves. In other words, we don't give them answers, we help them discover and uncover answers within themselves. Now, body-oriented coaching takes that a step further, because not only do we say, and the same with any somatic approach to coaching, not only are we saying that the clients themselves actually have all that they need, at the very least, for the next right step in their life towards whatever it is, that whatever desired outcome they have. But not only do clients have those answers, hold those answers themselves, but their bodies, or the body mind, holds answers and solutions that they themselves are not remotely consciously aware of until we begin to bring conscious awareness to the body. Because some of the science around that is that we begin to access the unconscious mind, that Eugene Genlin is coined for saying the body is our unconscious, which is a very bold statement, but in many ways it makes a great deal of sense. We have this notion of implicit memory, and there are also this phenomenon known as the felt sense, which all speak to these embodied ways of knowing that are really only accessed when we bring awareness to the body directly. So that's how it ties in, how the body ties into coaching, more broadly speaking. Now, what's really fascinating from my point of view, in my opinion, as we build on the last slide about process, is that coaching undoubtedly is incredibly influenced, as in the practice of coaching is incredibly influenced by the psychologist Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is described sometimes as the creator of the human potential movement. Someone called Selva is definitely was a huge person who influenced the creation of the human potential movement. But I think Carl Rogers, amongst others like Abraham Maslow and others during the time at Esalen, really moved this movement forward, the human potential movement, in the 60s largely, and began to really shift the Western helping professions approaches quite considerably towards these more humanistic ways of working, of which coaching is one. Coaching emerged just towards the tail end of that particular time at Esalen, and is really off the back of that. Interestingly, and not a lot of people, many of you may not be aware of this, and it's not spoken about a lot, but coaching itself actually is hugely influenced by Zen and other Eastern thought, like Taoism, which is also process oriented. So originally, I believe that coaching, and I'll come to this in a moment, coaching actually was an attempt to almost emulate some of these spiritual principles, you could say, in things like Zen Buddhism and Taoism in the helping professions, these ideas of non-interference, these ideas of non-violence, and other ways of working with our clients are very characteristic of coaching, or at least they were when coaching began. Coaching very quickly became quite performance oriented and results driven and very goal oriented, and I think changed a little bit from its original roots, in my opinion. So an example of this would be that the major influencer Carl Rogers spoke about this idea of the actualizing tendency, which links directly to this idea of belief and potential, that you don't need to tell an acorn to become an oak tree. The encoding for the oak tree is within the acorn already. And actually what the acorn needs is just the conditions to grow and unfold in that way, to become the oak tree that it was meant to be, which sounds a bit cliche to say meant to be, but you know what I mean. Now, a similar attitude is true of the idea of the actualizing tendency. Carl Rogers believes that all humans have this innate propensity towards growth, healing, and wholeness if the conditions allow for it. And he talks about this as something called the directional tendency. Now, what's interesting about this idea of the directional tendency is that the self-actualizing tendency, which interestingly comes largely from Maslow's work and someone called Kirkstein before Maslow, which is talking about the self, is actually quite influenced by Native American tradition, where actually a self-actualization is actually accomplished through the community, through connection, interconnectedness. But this notion of self-actualization, Carl Rogers describes, is actually an expression of something he spoke about, which is much broader, which he called the formative tendency of the universe, which is this idea that, yes, there is entropy, like all life decays and dies ultimately, but then on the flip side, there's this as powerful, if not more powerful, counterforce, which is called syntropy, which is this movement towards growth, healing, wholeness, evolution, which is what we spoke about when we spoke about process. My point being, my argument here is that Carl Rogers was absolutely a process thinker, so which is very, very much informed body-oriented coaching. Here's a quote directly from Carl Rogers that I'll put here in the chat. He says here, "When I am thus able to be in process, it is clear that there can be no closed systems of belief, no unchanging set of principles which I hold. Life is guided by a changing understanding of and interpretation of my experience. It is always in a process of becoming." And he speaks a lot about, in that book on becoming a person, a lot about process. Here's another one as well from Carl Rogers, which also reveals the somatic, his somatic leanings. "I have learned that my total organismic sensing of a situation, a felt sense of a situation, is more trustworthy than my intellect." Fascinating. How we went this many years of coaching without bringing that organismic sensing, the body-oriented approach, the kind of the felt sensing, into our client work absolutely baffles me, when it was right there in the roots of coaching, in the coaching approach, in the origin of what we call coaching today. Now here is a amen. Now here is a I love that, Zena. Here is a little quote from one of my all-time favorite texts, which is the Tao Te Ching, which is Lao Tzu's text, which is the kind of basis of Taoism, which is a kind of non-deity based spiritual philosophy, you could say, is really Taoism, for those who aren't familiar, is actually, well, the Tao Te Ching was actually originally written to help leaders govern countries and people in a way that was aligned with the natural unfolding of things. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I recommend it. I've read about 8 different translations now. I love it. So here they say, Lao Tzu says, the best leaders value their words and use them sparingly. When she has completed her task, the people will say, amazing, we did it all by ourselves. So that comes from the Tao Te Ching. And I personally think that that is a beautiful description of coaching. When coaching, in my opinion, is at its best, when coaching is truly about empowering the individual across from you and helping them themselves help themselves to truly help themselves. After all these years, my clients still amaze me. I'm dumbfounded by the creativity, resourcefulness, and wholeness of the people sat in front of me, even when I myself doubt it. When I'm sat there thinking, God, how are they going to help? How are they going to get themselves out of this situation? Surely they're going to need additional information. Surely I'm going to need to give them a guidance, some steer here. Never. Actually, what often happens is, as Lao Tzu say, how you govern a country should be the same as how you fry a small fish. Don't poke it too much. And I think the same is true in coaching. If you want to, in other words, if you want the client to really get the help they need, don't mess with it too much. Don't futz, don't interfere too much in their unfolding process. And actually, that's exactly what we do at the heart of body and coaching. We're really supporting the client to really help themselves. Their organism, their soma, their body mind knows exactly what they need, at the very least, for the next right step. So the thing here, I say somatic coaching is here to stay, and it's only just begun. Here's what I'm speaking to. So and actually I have 2 more quotes from the Tao Te Ching that I want to share with you very briefly in just a moment. But the ICF, the International Coach Federation, who are the kind of gold standard of coaching credentials, who we hold a level 2 accreditation with. In fact, the Somatic School is the first somatic coach training company and to ever receive a level 2 accreditation for the ICF, which I think is a recognition that body coaching is both true to somatics and true to coaching in equal measure. So really honoring the coaching approach. But they were surveyed and they were asked, why isn't the body or somatics mentioned more in the competency embodies a coaching mindset? So they have a competency that they call embodies a coaching mindset. Okay, that's one of the agreed upon competencies that makes coaching skillful coaching. And their response was this, I'll put it in the chat. While we have anecdotal evidence that some coaches use somatic techniques in their practice, this element does not emerge to a significant enough extent in our data to be included. So after all we've spoken about and all the benefits of working with the body somatically, it's almost extraordinary that that was 3 years ago. So only 3 years ago, 2020, that in 2020, that's what would be said. But here's the thing. Sorry, I'm so passionate. I'm getting excited now. Here's the thing. What we've discovered in sciences such as embodied cognition, interpersonal neurobiology, and in generally what we're beginning to discover through a lot of trauma research, for example, today, is really bringing the body mind front and center into the way that we really help people and help our clients. That science isn't going anywhere. It's like we've discovered this. Now we'll obviously have new discoveries and we'll keep innovating and evolving as helping professionals, but we're not going to go backwards from here. So I think it's safe to say that somatics is not a fad. It's not something that's kind of like the flavor of the month. Somatics is a way of understanding the human as an integrated whole, is how we're now understanding the human from these sciences. And it's what the spiritual traditions, sort of ancient spiritual traditions, have been speaking about for millennia, thousands of years. And so somatic coaching is here to stay, and it's really only just begun. If 3 years ago the ICF was saying that, then can you imagine how those of you who are here today are really pioneers of the next wave in the coaching industry? I mean, it's undeniable that if you're here thinking about becoming a body oriented coach or working somatically in your coaching work, and specifically in the coaching space, that you're absolutely at the forefront of a new wave in the helping professions. And in my opinion, it's a rich, and kind of a very optimistic future if you're looking to incorporate these skills within your client work. The tenets, body-oriented coaching. So this is a bit more about body-oriented coaching specifically, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here. I want to give you a very, very simple thing. It's something we call the tenets. So the tenets of body-oriented coaching are these three: love, process, and trust. And we actually, we don't even talk about this that much on the course, but it's really at the heart of body-oriented coaching, and it really is an encapsulation. Now, love is a funny word, is it not? Because love conjures up all sorts of associations of romantic love, or kind of a Valentine's Day kind of love. But what we're talking about when we say love here is actually love as a verb, or perhaps another way of saying it's a way of being. It's a way of being loving. Now, Carl Rogers, who created person-centered work, talks about these three core conditions of working with our clients: empathetic understanding, congruency, and unconditional positive regard. Now, what is love if not unconditional positive regard? It's this idea that we can work with our clients in a way such that our presence itself is transformative. And this is absolutely learnable. You can learn to become a more generative presence for our clients. Here's an interesting thing. The science of interpersonal neurobiology is discovering, when we look at what really works in therapy, more specifically in therapy, not so much in coaching, but I think it would apply. I think we can make that leap that it would apply to coaching too. What really works in terms of the difference between successful and unsuccessful therapeutic outcomes, they believe one of the greatest contributing factors is actually the therapist or practitioner's capacity to support co-regulation within the space. Maybe just drop into the chat if you've heard of co-regulation, but it's this notion, but it's this idea that we are working with how our relationship can support nervous system regulation, and so that's what love's all about. Then, of course, process. We've spoken about length, and trust is about really trusting ourselves, trusting the client, trusting the process. And so that has to do entirely with the notion of wu wei, the non-doing, the non-interference. When we believe that there's something, a self-organizing, a life-forwarding, an actualizing tendency that we can steward or midwife or support into unfolding, then we can work in that way, and we can begin to trust the process and actually help our clients with that. Great, Claire, in the belief in the co-regulation, great. And Samantha, yes, there'll be a recording and you'll get the slides too. All right, great. Final piece here, last bit here is a meta model. Now, I know there's been a lot of information today. We'll probably edit this event to make some changes to this so that it's a little bit more, so that you have a kind of digestible information, but hopefully you're still with me. Maybe you can pop in the chat. How you doing? Are you still with us right now? We're wrapping up now. The last piece here is this meta model for integrative practice. Great. So this is a model developed by my wonderful friend Nick Bolton, who's the founder of Animas Center for Coaching, which is another coach training school. Dear friend of mine created this model for helping us think about integrative practice. He says that integrative practice can be kind of mapped with this idea of having a unifying theory, a purpose, a set of principles, and then a variety of approaches, the various approaches that you are integrating. Now, it's important to mention here that okay, great. I'm just reading the chat here and I'm just seeing that you're with. That's great. It's important to mention here that body-oriented coaching is indeed an integrative framework. It's a modality in its own right, and it's an integration of many different approaches, established and respective modalities in the world of body therapy or somatic coaching at large. So here's the meta model, you could say, of body-oriented coaching. The approaches that we draw on: person-centered practice, focusing, Hakomi, constellations, structural systemic constellations, organic intelligence, and more. Oh, Gestalt would be another one, and others. Rather than giving a light touch for these various skills, we've very deliberately, very intentionally selected a variety of skills or versions of skills that work really well in unison, in harmony, in this approach that we call body-oriented coaching. So there's the integration of approaches. The principles, excuse me, the guiding principles of body-oriented coaching are thus: wholeness, the body-mind, non-doing, not knowing, and this notion of all embracing, or the idea of being with all aspects of somebody's being in a kind of equanimous way, without exception. Unconditional positive regard would be another way of putting that. And so these are some of the principles that make up our framework, this modality of body coaching. The purpose: to feel fully alive, wholly oneself, and at one with the flow of life. Now, one of the amazing outcomes I feel that for our somanauts, which is what we call our body-oriented coaches in training, or alumni, is that they often describe this experience of beginning to trust their body more, trust themselves and trust their bodies and trust the communication of their body, but also begin to feel through the process of learning body-oriented coaching that they can actually trust life itself more and the unfolding of life. And I think perhaps that's because of all of the entire modality itself. Everything we've spoken about today is all coherent and coheres around our unifying theory, which is this notion of process, or you could say love and process. Love and process could be another way of putting it, but process is included. Love is included in process. Actually, when you get into process philosophy more deeply, it's a real core component of that. And it's this idea actually of a kind of love that's not controlling, a kind of love that's not unilateral, not a power over or a kind of coercive love, but a kind of love that is a partnering, persuasive love. And that's that idea, this idea of the lure. The idea of this evolutionary force is a kind of persuasive force, energy in our lives, this thing that implies the next step, our next right step. When we really listen and we begin to receive those signals that come through the body-mind, is one of the most amazing ways to access that information. That a body-mind is almost like a radio receiver for this self-organizing, driving, formative tendency of the universe. And I think that we can. This is the whole skill set here is about working to support that. Okay, so finally, just to wrap up here, I really want to share this wonderful quote from Eugene Genlin from an article he wrote called Instructions for Not Following Instructions. And it says here, human nature is not fixed and not knowable in some single system. That is fortunate. No knowledge can push you out of the driver's seat of your life, especially not our knowledge here, which is to be about finding your own process. So we've shared a lot here today, and there's a lot of ideas. When it comes to the actual practice of body integration, we really are letting go of concepts and ideas and doing a lot less talking, generally speaking, and a lot less doing. It's really very much about a way of being and a process of becoming. And yet all that I've shared today are just perspectives. They're our point of view. So if they align with you and they feel that they fit your value system and your worldview, then great. And we're kindred spirits. And if not, take what you like and leave the rest. And maybe with the meta model frame we just showed you there, you might come up with your own model of practice, your own way of working, like we did with body image coaching. So that's a bit about body image coaching. I did say I would wanted to leave some time for some questions. I will post into the chat one more time those links there. If you want to schedule a call with one of our course consultants, it's the first link. If you'd like to attend one of our introduction to body image coaching events, the next one is on Monday, this coming Monday. That's 3 to 5 p.m. UK time. But if that time doesn't work for you on your time zone, just have a look on the website. You'll find other times that should fit yours fine. So yeah, anyone got any questions? Let's take the next 7 minutes, and then at the top of the hour, we'll close up here. Thanks so much for joining. Anyone got any questions or any comments, in fact? Yeah, Xenia.
Joined by phone, so I'm hoping that the audio will be okay because I'm having some internet issues. So first of all, I think I just want to reiterate what I've seen a lot in the chat is that yeah, your passion for this is so infectious, and I've really just been on the edge of my seat taking this all in, and want to rewatch the recording after as well. One of the questions I had, so I'm currently in the process of becoming a coach, and I've been going through this program, and that's sort of as deep as they go. The example that you gave of, oh, I noticed when I said that, or you were talking about it, you like stiffened up. What's that about? Or, I noticed you started smiling. What's that about? Without going too deep into the techniques that this program teaches, can you just give a flavor of how that interaction would be just a bit different from this point of view?
Yes, that's a beautiful question. Yeah. So there's actually an article I wrote. We don't do much on social media, I have to admit, but there is an article that I wrote many years ago on LinkedIn that's a bit about this. And in that I describe that there are sort of, but not so much about your question, more about the topic, but I will answer your question. So that in that I describe there's kind of a set of questions that are quite common when people are trying to bring the body into their work for the first time. And there's nothing wrong with these questions. And you can have very fruitful conversations with your clients off the back of these. Some are, for example, oh, I noticed when I asked you that you did this, and right, and that has risk of this concept of confabulation, this idea of simply that the client gives their best guess at what's happening for them. Mental meaning making, just make it up. It's kind of like, okay, I think it's this. And now the thing about confabulation is that they might not necessarily believe or be aware that it's a fabrication. It's it may feel like, oh, that is true for me. But the reliability of that insight is questionable, in my opinion. The other questions are things like, if it had a color, what would it be? If it had a shape, what would that be, etc. These are, again, valid questions, but quite often those kind of questions take our clients to more evaluative and analytic headspaces, which is sort of the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish in somatic coaching. Often they're thinking about it as opposed to speaking from it. So to give you a flavor of some of the skills that these would be, we have, let's have a look. Let's see here. So a good example actually is the focusing skills. One of the skills we train on the course, focusing. Now with focusing, what's actually happening is the client is having essentially an interaction, a conversation with their felt sense directly. So the coach will offer these, we call them kind of cushion suggestions. That's what Anne Weiser Cornell describes them as, but you could call them felt sense invitations. The coach might say something like, you might invite it to let you know what's getting it stuck here, or something like that. And then rather than the client responding directly to you as coach, which would be them being in conversation with you, what they're doing is they're actually being invited to take that inquiry and almost offer it to the body and then sit and wait. And it's this incredible kind of almost like we don't tend to do this day to day, but it's this humility to say, I don't know consciously, I don't know the answer here, but my body might know something I don't know. And so as we sit and wait with that interoceptive sense, typically what happens is we get this sort of bubbling up, this emergence of insight and awareness and a kind of knowing that quite often provides the clarity, the absolute clarity for the client. And they think, oh, exactly, that's why I'm stuck. I get it. And when something, Eugene Jen would say, when something shifts in the body, it shifts in your life. And I think that is true of my experience, that when we have those insights, that something changes for us. And there are other skills in which what we're doing is, rather than naming what we're seeing, we're drawing attention to it, maybe through mirroring in a very invitational way, and other skills like that. So to give you a little flavor, we're doing these things without kind of commenting on something that's not happened, but commenting on something that just happened. Instead, we're working with what's happening now, so they can be in the experience as they report from the experience, as opposed to talking about something that happened just a moment ago. Does that help, Xenia?
Yeah, that's extremely helpful, and it gives me a really good sense of like the difference. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. Okay, so I think we'll have time for one more question here. Anyone else got a question? I'll check the chat just in case.
Could I just ask, following on from what you just said then, so might it be that that the client may not even in the session necessarily even vocalize what the finding was. Like it could even just be that it was a felt sense in the body, and something else might happen after the session, and so it's not even necessarily that they will cognitively or vocalize what's changed, but sometimes things can just change.
Absolutely. It's almost like a some of this is pre-verbal, right? It's almost like some shifts can occur inside people, and of course giving it language can be incredibly helpful to integrate the experience, but it need not happen. And I love this quote from Ron Kurtz, who created Hakomi, which is one of the approaches we drew on. It says something along the lines of, don't ask the client why, simply turn them towards their experience. That's all you need to do. If you ask for explanations, you're ruining the process right there. Something like that. So in other words, again, I think this comes down to, and it's one of our core values at the Somatic School, which is humility. But I think there's a humility in as a practitioner. It's almost like when we truly are working as a steward or a midwife, we might not know what's happening for the client. It's okay. We can just trust that as long as it's quite apparent when shifts have occurred. Typically, clients go from feeling agitated to feeling like a sense of ease, relief, exhale. And those kinds of shifts occur in the non-verbals. We don't necessarily need to know exactly what caused it or why. As long as the client does, that can be perfectly good. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're at the top of the hour, everyone. There is just one question here from Sean. I sense the power dynamics in somatic coaching is a discussion topic as it brought to equilibrium in the client, and yet the coach is being asked to lead. How is this tension dealt with? Coach is being asked to lead. So I'll just say this very briefly. A big part of body-oriented coaching in particular is this notion of following. So actually the coach isn't necessarily leading, but there are at times invitations, but the invitations come from what we're seeing in the client. Someone once said, where do the best coaching questions come from? See, the concept of powerful questions is quite common in the world of coaching. Where do the best coaching questions come from? The client. Right, so break that down. Our attention on our clients will give us everything we need to inform the questions. They don't come from our clever thinking about what's going on. In body-oriented coaching, we have this incredible attunement to our clients. We're really aware of what's going on in real nuance and subtlety, and it will give us everything we need to do to give the next question or to offer an invitation. So they don't come from our own agenda. They come from what the client's own body mind is offering us as a kind of a hint or a signal of where we're heading next. This is where would be helpful to head next. Comes straight from the body mind of the client. Yeah, okay, cool. Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome, and good to hear your voice, and great to have you here. I am an appreciator of a strong beard as well. So beautiful, man. Okay, great. So thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. It's been great to have you with us. And yeah, the link's there in the chat. When our next intro event is. If you want to come along, please feel encouraged. And it's been a joy. Thanks so much. Take good care.